Hi, my name's Matty Rasmus. Today I'm going to show you how to make biltong or jerky in your own home at minimal cost and with minimal equipment. First thing you're going to need is a cabinet. Now that sounds expensive, but it's not. Okay, this is how to make your cabinet. First thing you're going to need is a standard removals packing case. You see this one about that size. You'll need a knife. And what you do is you cut out a little window like that with your knife in each side of the packing case. You need some mosquito mesh. You can buy the plastic version, which is very cheap, just a couple of dollars. And you take that mosquito mesh, this is to keep the flies out. You take the mosquito mesh and you tack it into place with drawing pins. You come from the top. You see the drawing pins? And then you use some common PVA wood glue and you just run it along the edges like that, a good dollop of wood glue around the edges. Let it set for a few hours and then you can move on to the next side. And that will stop any flies or anything getting into your box. You take an awl or something like that to just punch some holes in the lid, give you good ventilation. And then you'll need somewhere to hang your... In my box I've got a light which I hardly ever use, so don't worry about that. That was just to create a bit of heat, but I don't need that. You'll need some, these are 8mm dowels just to hang your biltong on. So you take your awl and you punch a hole in this side and in that side. And you slip your dowel through, and it goes right through to the other side. That's just to show you your dowels, and you'll be hanging your meat on there to dry. Right, then you set up your box anywhere you like, as long as it's cool and dry. And you just get an ordinary household fan. And you stick it on the one side and you just keep all the doors open that you've cut into the box and you just leave your fan running. If you're in an air-conditioned room, you only let your fan run for a day or so just to dry the outside of the meat. But if it's not air-conditioned, I would suggest let the fan run for the whole time, and after about 3 or 4 days your meat will be dry enough to eat. Right, the next step in making your biltong is to get your spices ready. I like to mix the spices fresh, gives it much more flavour. Now you're going to need, the only spices I use are whole coriander, coarse salt and black pepper. I like to grind my coriander fresh because the pre-ground coriander doesn't have much flavour. So that's the first thing I do. Just put my coriander in a pestle and mortar, and then we just do grinding until it gets quite fine. And then as I can smell it now coming out, it smells really, really nice. And with the pre-ground coriander you don't get that lovely aroma. So you just do this until it's pretty fine. Right, that's about fine enough. Now, I forgot to tell you, I use about a half a cup of whole coriander to a cup of salt, so it's 2-to-1 ratio. So then I'll stick my salt in and I'll carry on grinding. You need to get your salt quite fine, but the coarse salt helps to grind the coriander further as well. So you just keep doing this. It takes quite a bit of grinding. I suppose you could put it in one of those blending machines and save yourself a lot of work, but I like to do it the old-fashioned way. Right, now after a few minutes of that, it's quite strenuous, but it's good for you. And you can really smell it now. It smells really, really nice. You can smell that fresh coriander. And when I get to that stage, then I just get a pepper grinder. Now pepper on uncooked pepper on biltong is very strong, so just be a bit careful. I would probably use somewhere approaching a teaspoon in about this amount, and that's plenty. But you know, it's according to taste, and other people put other things in. They put chili powder, they put garlic, salt, those kind of things you can put in if that's your taste. But this is the basic recipe that I use, and then you can elaborate on that if you want to. And I don't use all of this on one mix, and you can keep it quite easily. You just seal it in a Ziploc bag or something like that, the stuff that you're not using, and you know, you can use it next time. Right, there's my spices done. Now I'm ready to cut my meat. Right, now we're going on to cutting the meat and seasoning the meat, so I'll show you how to do that. The meat that I prefer to use is topside. It just makes very nice biltong, so I always use topside, but you can use whatever you want. When you're cutting the meat, it's very important to cut it with the grain, because when you cut your biltong, you cut it the other way and then it's cross grain and it's much easier to chew. So I cut about a 20mm strip. You need a nice sharp knife, and you just go straight through like that, your 20mm strips. A little tip I'll give you is when you get to the end of this meat, cut a few thinner strips, because they'll be ready quicker than the others, so you can start eating your biltong sooner. Just this will be my special thin slice, so that I've got some biltong that's ready a bit quicker. And then I normally just cut it this way a bit as well. You just got to be careful with your thin slices when you're seasoning. Put less seasoning on, because it can get quite salty. These are quite broad strips, so I'm going to just slit them down the middle. Just makes them easier to handle. And there we go, our meat's cut. Next step now is take some just cheap ordinary brown vinegar, put a bit in your dish. Your dish must be plastic or glass. I like to just use a plastic dish that I can seal, because it's got to go in the fridge overnight for a few hours. And then I just take my biltong, I flap it in there, and this is, it gives it quite a nice flavour, but mostly this is to just make the outside of the biltong a bit acid, so that you know, that white fungus you get growing on biltong, it can't grow that well when it's in an acid medium. So this just helps to keep that acid away. The other thing it does is just wets the surface, so that when you put your spices on, they stick, and it's quite easy then to cover them with spice. Okay, that's all I do, just get them in there. You don't have to soak it for any length of time. Then I'm just going to go over to the sink and pour out the excess. Right, now I normally just put a bit in a bottle with a screw cap, because it's just much easier to spread it from here than from a plastic bag. So I'll just fill this up, and then just give it a little shake, mix it up. Right, and you can do it anyway, but I just want to show you about how much to use. I'll just sprinkle a bit in the bottom here, so that the bottom of the biltong's got something on it. And then put your thick pieces down first. Just find the sizes that fit best, and that should be alright. Now this is about how much I use for this thickness of meat. If the meat's thinner, you'd use less, because otherwise it'll be too salty. And it might look like quite a lot, but we leave it overnight, and the salt dissolves and soaks into the meat, and so that you've got salt all the way through, because your salt is your preservative, so you want salt all the way through, and that's what keeps it preserved. So there's not a hang of a lot more here. These thin slices I put right on the one side because I'm going to just put a bit less on them. Just make sure it's well covered, everything's covered. And then I'll put the lid on, put it in the fridge. The salt also draws quite a lot of water out of the meat, so that helps you with your drying process. And then sometimes after a few hours I just turn this meat over a bit just to make sure that the spices are even throughout. So that's all we do. We put a lid on it, put it in the fridge. Right, so we've had our meat marinating overnight in the spices, and now it's time to hang the meat. And all I use is paper clips. Just get a whole lot of them out. And then just focus on me. You just straighten them out like that. And hook them through the meat. Right, so that's putting the hooks in. Now they're ready for hanging, and if you look in the bowl there, you see all the water that's come out of the meat, so that helps with the drying process, that we've got all that water out of the meat. Then it's a matter of hanging it in your box, or your cabinet. And you have to just make sure that the meat doesn't touch, pieces of meat don't touch each other, because you need good airflow between the meat. And if they touch, you won't get that, and it won't dry nicely. Right, then that's all the meat hanging, and you can see they're not touching each other, just make sure. And now it's time to close the box like that to stop any flies coming in, and then I'll set it up with the fan coming in this side, and in 2 to 3 days I'll be eating biltong. Right, so here we are just over 2 days later, and there it is. You can see how they've shrunk. That's natural. You're going to lose probably 60% of your weight. Once you've got them to the dryness that you like, the best way to store them is actually just to leave them hanging in the box. If you put them in the fridge, they're going to get mold on them because it's too humid. If you want to pack them, put them in a brown paper packet. That's the best way to go. So I just save my brown paper packets, and then you just store them in there. And I usually make small amounts so that I don't have to store them very long, because they get drier and drier. Okay, there's a nice piece. We'll just show you what it looks like. Just cut a few slices. I like my biltong quite wet. This is even a little bit dry for me. So I could have been eating this quite a bit sooner. Right, then the last thing we have to do is taste it. It's really good. You should try it. Fantastic. Cheers.